All right. Ready to dive deep into something kind of controversial?
I am. Hit me.
We're tackling the age-old question. Is marriage actually a good deal? Especially in today's world.
Woof. Yeah, that's a big one.
And to help us unpack all of this, we've got a really insightful conversation with relationship expert Orion Taraban.
You know, when I was listening to this, he really doesn't hold back.
No, he does not. Which is what makes it so interesting.
Absolutely.
So to kick things off, one of the first things that Taraban really lays out is this idea of marriage as a contract.
Yeah. Not just like, a romantic lovey-dovey thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But like a legally binding agreement.
With real-world implications.
Huge implications.
Yeah.
Especially when you start thinking about the financial side of things.
Well, especially for men. He really gets into that.
He does. He talks about how if things go south, the financial fallout can be pretty significant.
Yeah. Like, we all sign these state-defined marriage contracts when we get married.
Right. But we don't really think about it like that.
Yeah. But it's like we don't really understand the fine print.
Right. We kind of just, go with the flow.
And he talks about prenups.
Oh, yeah. Which no one really likes to talk about.
Right. Like, who wants to bring that up when you're all lovey-dovey? But he argues they're basically just custom-designed contracts.
Tailored to your specific needs.
Exactly. Like, shouldn't every couple think about that?
So what he's saying is we all have a prenup going into a marriage. It's just the state-defined one may not be the best deal for everyone.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
we're all operating on this default contract that we didn't even really choose.
Yeah. And he also points out that this contract thing doesn't just apply to marriage.
Oh, totally. Like, living together, even without a ring, can still lead to legal issues, especially in places with common law marriage.
That's right.
So being upfront about your expectations and maybe even getting a cohabitation agreement.
So it sounds like what he's saying is, regardless of whether you're getting married or just moving in together, you've got to be at least a little bit legally savvy to protect yourself.
Because things can get messy.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about when they're caught up in the romance of it all.
It's like we romanticize relationships so much.
We do.
We don't always think about those practical things.
Right, exactly.
But Taraban also points out an interesting difference between straight couples and gay couples.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So historically, gay couples have had to fight for the right to marry
Right.
and create their own relationship models. So he argues that they tend to be more upfront about the business side of things from the get-go.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's like because they haven't had this, traditional path laid out for them, they've had to be more explicit about their expectations.
Right. They can't just rely on those default societal norms.
Wow.
So overall, I think what Taraban is saying is that love is important, don't get me wrong.
Right, of course.
But being clear about your expectations and those potential consequences.
Both financially and emotionally.
Yeah, exactly. Is absolutely key before you jump into something as serious as living together or getting married.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. So now, with all of this in mind about, these kind of contracts and agreements, Taraban then goes on to talk about how the actual dating landscape itself is changing.
Oh, yeah. It's a whole different ballgame out there than it used to be.
It is, especially with the rise of online dating and social media.
Like, everybody is curating these perfect online personas.
Right. It's like the highlight reel of everyone's lives.
Exactly. And Taraban talks about how, in this digital age, perceived attractiveness and status,
And how you portray yourself online.
yeah, all play a huge role in how people perceive you.
It's almost like people are swiping left on real-life connections in pursuit of this, fantasy Instagram partner.
It's true.
But there's this one anecdote that Taraban shares that really stuck with me. He was talking about overhearing a group of women bragging about their sugar daddies.
Oh.
Men that they were seeing purely for the financial benefits. And these women were in relationships.
What? So they're like double dipping.
Exactly. It kind of makes you question what's really driving people's motivations these days.
And it makes me think back to what Taraban was saying earlier about marriage as a contract.
Right.
Like maybe there's this kind of unspoken transaction happening in a lot of relationships.
Interesting. Okay.
And he's not saying this applies to everyone, but he suggests that men often are seeking to exchange resources for sex.
Right.
And women might be seeking to exchange sex for resources.
Okay, so there's like this exchange happening, but we don't talk about it.
Exactly.
And he even ties this into the normalization of sex work,
Yeah.
pointing out that it exists on a spectrum
Mm-hmm.
from, more explicit forms like escorting
Right.
to more subtle forms like sugaring.
Even to traditional relationships where financial security is a major factor.
It's like a whole range of what people consider to be acceptable. And, it's important to remember that Taraban isn't passing judgment here.
Right. He's just observing,
So,
like a sociologist or something.
exactly. He's just looking at how these changing dynamics are affecting traditional relationships. He even recounts a conversation he had with photographer James Slayton, who's known for, his really raw and gritty work. And Stain suggests that even traditional marriage could be seen as a form of resource exchange.
Whoa. So we're all just playing roles in this giant economic game of love.
Right, it's a really thought-provoking idea.
It is. But he doesn't just focus on finances,
Right,
Taraban also dives into the importance of emotional resources, like what else are we bringing to the table?
right. Because it's not just about money, right? It's about feeling fulfilled and appreciated and all of those things.
Exactly. He talks about a woman who chose to return to sex work,
Oh, wow.
even though she was already with a wealthy man,
Okay.
because she craved that sense of purpose and feeling valued for her skills. And that wasn't something she was getting in that relationship.
So she was getting the financial resources, but not the emotional ones.
Exactly.
That's so interesting. And this kind of leads us to another fascinating concept that Taraban introduces, the idea of the adorer and the adored. He suggests that in every relationship, there's this inherent imbalance where one person likes the other person a little bit more.
Oh, so
Yeah.
like one person's always a bit more invested.
Exactly. And Taraban argues that women often end up being the adorer because they're more likely to stick around even when the initial spark starts to fade.
So he's saying women are more likely to prioritize the emotional connection over other factors.
Yeah. And he even tells this really poignant story about his own mother, who he feels was the adorer in her marriage. And she later regretted sacrificing her own dreams and aspirations for that relationship.
Oh, that's sad.
It is. It really makes you think about those societal expectations that are often placed on women.
Right, to be the caretaker.
Exactly. The emotional anchor in the relationship.
That's so interesting. But I mean, how does this imbalance actually play out in relationships?
Well, that's where the idea of the balance of attraction comes in, and how that balance can shift over time, like big life events, promotions, infidelity.
Or even just the everyday grind of life together.
Exactly. All of these things can affect how attracted we are to our partner. And Taraban has this really interesting perspective on jealousy.
Okay, I'm listening.
He says that actually revealing your jealousy to your partner can really harm the balance of attraction
Oh, I would have thought that.
because it can make you seem insecure.
So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Exactly. You think being open and honest about your feelings would be a good thing, but he's saying it can sometimes backfire.
Wow.
And this ties into how our perception of our partner's behavior is heavily influenced by how we're feeling about them at that moment. Like the same action can be seen as cute or annoying depending on how attracted you are to them.
Yeah, it's true. Like when you're in the honeymoon phase, everything they do is adorable.
Exactly. But then later on, those same quirks can drive you crazy. It's like we're seeing them through this lens of attraction, which can really distort our perception.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. So how do we keep that lens clear?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting because now Taraban takes us into the territory of monogamy. And this is where he really challenges some conventional thinking. He introduces this concept of monogamish relationships, acknowledging that complete and total monogamy might not be realistic or even desirable for everyone.
Okay, wait. Is he saying it's okay to cheat?
Not exactly. He's not advocating for cheating at all.
Okay, good, because that would be crossing a line.
What he's saying is that human desire is really complex
Right.
and that different people structure their relationships in different ways. And even the definition of cheating can be subjective.
Oh, that's so true. What one person considers harmless flirting, another might see as a major betrayal.
Exactly. And he brings up a really surprising anecdote from this entrepreneur group that he was part of.
Okay.
Over 50% of the people there who were in relationships admitted to having something else going on.
Wow. So are you saying that our societal ideal of monogamy isn't really matching up with reality?
Well, it seems that way, right? So then the question becomes, what do we do about it?
And Taraban's answer is communication. Couples need to be really upfront about their boundaries and expectations, even if they're different from traditional norms.
So no more sweeping things under the rug.
Right. You got to cock it out.
Exactly. And this leads to the whole idea of relationship maintenance.
Oh, yeah, because relationships take work.
They do. And Taraban really emphasizes this. Like, we can't just assume that our partner is going to be there forever no matter what.
You got to put in the effort.
We do. He even compares it to continuously dating your partner.
Ah, I love that. Even after years together.
Yeah, because it's so easy to get complacent. And he argues that making an effort to keep that spark alive is essential for long-term success. And this loops back to that whole lens of attraction idea we were talking about earlier. When attraction is high, we see our partner's actions more positively.
Right. But when it fades,
Even their cutest quirks can start to annoy us.
it's true. It all comes back to that balance of attraction.
It does. So keeping that attraction strong seems to be key.
How do we actually do that?
That's a great question. And we'll be diving deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, let's take a quick break.
It makes you think about what we're really striving for in these relationships.
Mhm.
Is it just about external validation or those superficial things? Or is there this deeper need for like meaning and contribution?
Right. Like, what are we actually looking for in a partner?
Exactly. And that's where Taraban's own personal story comes in. He talks about how he always had this dream of taking a month off to travel to Japan.
Sounds like a pretty nice dream.
Right. But when he finally did it, it actually turned out to be a mistake. He ended up feeling kind of lost and unfulfilled because he realized that his work and routines and even those connections, the things he usually took for granted, those actually gave him a sense of purpose.
So the grass isn't always greener on the other side.
Exactly. Sometimes it's about appreciating what we already have and finding that fulfillment in the everyday. And it kind of challenges that idea that once we achieve success, we can just kick back and relax.
Yeah, like the whole, I'm going to work hard now and then retire early and travel the world kind of thing.
Exactly. But Taraban found that actually finding purpose in what he was doing was more important than any external achievement.
Really makes you question those assumptions we have about success and happiness.
It does. And he ties this back to the importance of self-awareness, like knowing your values and understanding what truly brings you joy, and then structuring your life in a way that actually aligns with those values instead of just chasing after fleeting desires.
Yeah. It's like, what are you actually working towards?
Yeah.
And is it something that's going to make you truly happy in the long run?
Exactly.
And speaking of what makes you happy, we got to talk about Taraban's learning stack and consumption habits. Because he's a big reader, but he's very intentional about what he consumes. He actually avoids current events and popular trends.
Oh, wow. Really? Okay.
Yeah. He opts for classic literature and timeless wisdom instead. He specifically mentions the Penguin Great Ideas series, which is a collection of these classic works on philosophy and psychology and culture.
I love that series.
Right. And it really reflects this belief he has in the power of timeless wisdom to guide us through the complexities of the modern world. So it sounds like he's advocating for being a really critical consumer of information instead of just blindly following the crowd or whatever trending.
Right. Like form your own informed opinions. Think for yourself.
Exactly. And then he also talks about the rise of traditionally masculine men partnering with traditionally feminine women, which he sees as kind of a response to the shift away from those more egalitarian relationships that we've seen in recent years.
But like the pendulum swinging back in the other direction.
Yeah, and it really reflects this ongoing debate about gender roles and relationships.
Like, what does a modern relationship actually look like?
Right. And, Taraban doesn't endorse one model over another. He just acknowledges that there are different approaches that work for different people.
Mm-hmm.
And then he brings back this concept of the captain from his book, which is this metaphor for people who take charge of their lives and their relationships.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember him talking about that.
And he suggests that women are increasingly becoming captains, pursuing their own ambitions, choosing partners that align with their values, not necessarily prioritizing marriage and motherhood in their early 20s like they might have in the past.
It's like they're writing their own rules.
They are. And that has implications for men as well. Taraban suggests that men who are seeking more traditional relationships might need to adapt to this changing landscape.
Yeah, be a little more patient, a little more understanding.
Exactly. And then he drops this really bold statement that totally contradicts the common belief that we should be ourselves in relationships.
Okay, what does he say?
He says one of the most toxic beliefs is that you get to be yourself in a relationship.
Whoa, okay, I did not expect that.
It's provocative, right?
Mm-hmm.
But his argument is that we should actually strive to be the best versions of ourselves in our relationships.
Yeah.
Just like we do in our professional lives. Like, we wouldn't show up to work in our pajamas and expect to be taken seriously.
Right. Okay, true. So it's about putting in the effort to be the best partner you can be.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that letting ourselves go, both physically and emotionally, can damage that foundation of the relationship. So it's kind of a challenge to that whole idea of unconditional love and acceptance.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think.
It does. So it sounds like a lot of it comes down to effort and intentionality.
Right. It's not just about finding the right person. It's about becoming the right people, both individually and together.
That's a great way to put it. And now, to illustrate these points even further, Taraban shares some research. And this might surprise you. Studies suggest that men who cheat are actually just as happy in their relationships as men who don't.
Wait, really?
But there's a noticeable difference in relationship satisfaction between women who cheat and those who don't.
So women who cheat are less happy in their relationships.
Yeah, it seems that way. And this actually aligns with what Taraban was saying earlier about women often being more emotionally invested in their relationships. For women, infidelity often stems from this deeper dissatisfaction, like a sign that their emotional needs aren't being met.
So it's not just about the physical act.
It's about that emotional disconnect.
That's really interesting. But then how do we actually foster that deeper emotional connection?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And Taraban emphasizes the importance of open communication, active listening, being willing to understand and meet your partner's needs.
Oh, those are so important.
Yeah, creating that safe space where both partners feel comfortable expressing their needs and desires. And you know what? I think this all comes back to that idea of intentionality that we were talking about earlier. Relationships require ongoing effort, and we can't just assume that our partner is going to be there forever no matter what.
You have to actively nurture that connection, prioritize communication, make an effort to really understand and respond to your partner's evolving needs.
And on that note, this brings us to the end of our exploration of, this first part of our conversation with Orion Taraban.
Okay, so we've covered the changing dating landscape.
Right.
The idea of marriage as a contract.
The importance of emotional resources.
The adorer and adored dynamic.
And the challenges of monogamy.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
But there's still so much more to unpack.
Okay, so where are we going next?
Well, in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to delve even deeper into Taraban's insights on attraction.
Ah, keeping that spark alive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How to maintain those healthy relationships over the long term.
And maybe some more of his personal experiences.
You bet. So stay tuned for the next part of our deep dive with Orion Taraban. Wow, we covered a lot of ground with Taraban. So much to think about.
Yeah, he really packed a lot into that conversation. What really struck you?
I think one of the things that I found most refreshing about Taraban's perspective is he doesn't sugarcoat anything.
Yeah, he's very straight up.
He is. Like, he tackles those complexities of relationships head on.
Doesn't shy away from the tough stuff.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of relationship advice out there can be kind of fluffy.
Oh, totally. Just like, follow your heart.
Exactly. But Taraban brings in that intellectual side, too. He encourages us to think not just with our hearts, but with our minds as well.
So it's not just about the emotional side, but the practical, too.
Right. Considering all the angles,
Yeah.
which makes you really question those traditional assumptions we often make about love and relationships.
Definitely. He's like, let's break this down and really analyze it.
He is. And I think that's so valuable because it helps us to be more intentional in our relationships,
Yeah.
to really put in the work to make them thrive.
Yeah, it's like he's giving us the tools to build a solid foundation.
He is. So I guess circling back to our original question, is marriage a bad deal? It seems like Taraban doesn't give us a simple yes or no answer.
No, he doesn't. He's not about those easy answers.
No, instead, he gives us the knowledge and tools to kind of decide for ourselves.
Right, like, here's all the information. Now you figure out what works for you.
Exactly. He helps us define what a good deal even means to us personally.
Because it's going to be different for everyone.
Exactly. And helps us to navigate all of that complexity with a lot more awareness.
Yeah, with our eyes wide open.
Exactly. So I guess the question for our listeners is, how would you define a good deal in a relationship? What are your non-negotiables?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. What are you willing to compromise on? It's something to really think about.
It is. Because ultimately it comes down to this. Are you creating the kind of relationship you truly desire?
That's such a powerful question to ask yourself. And if any of our listeners are hungry for more from Orion Taraban, his YouTube channel, Psychax, is a great place to start. And his book, The Value of Others, is fantastic as well.
Oh, I loved that book. He's such a wealth of knowledge and insights on relationships.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit challenging.
Challenging in a good way.
Definitely. Until next time, keep those conversations flowing and keep exploring this amazing world of human connection.